Countertops, name of your company?
Origins Concrete Design.
And you are based in Ferndale, I understand?
Yes.
Very good. And you've been doing this for quite a while. It
12
seems to
years.
Be, yeah?
Yeah.
And the market, I'm guessing, is increasing for this product.
It's going up a little bit, yeah, but we'll see.
Well,
I never get too. I just like to keep it as is. Let's see, put it like that.
Understood. Well, thanks for being here. I certainly appreciate it. Taking time out of your day on a Friday is not an easy thing to do. Very special guest here today. My son, Alex Fahle, is with us. He is a college student, a freshman at Kalamazoo College, home for the month. And his mom basically wouldn't let him sit around doing nothing all day. So I dragged him down here to be on the People's Panel today. I'm just kidding, by the way. But, thanks for being here, bud.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much.
You.
And the only reason I'm bringing him on is because he actually knows a lot more about stuff than I do. So that's a good thing to have in your back pocket. So welcome. I'm glad to have you here. And I guess we'll get started. I mean, the big news that came out yesterday, look, we all live in sort of this Donald Trump land right now. You know, there's news swirling around him all the time, new tweets coming out all the time. But now, with the Mueller investigation, we seem to be getting somewhere. Michael Cohen, of course, Trump's longtime fixer/attorney, pled guilty to lying to Congress yesterday, entered a guilty plea in there, suggesting that he lied to Congress about working on a deal to build a new Trump hotel in Moscow during the 2016 campaign, told Congress that there wasn't anything going on. President Trump, in the meantime, has said all along that he doesn't have any business with Russia, didn't have any plans to do any business with Russia. There's no collusion, blah, blah, blah. Now he's saying, well, you know, we were working on a deal, but it was totally legal. You guys see this as sort of a turning point in this investigation? Are we actually getting somewhere, and are we starting to learn a little bit more about what was really going on? Because it seems to me that the key question is whether or not Russia has any leverage over this president. Did this impact the approach that they took to Russia?
I'm not entirely sure, because I know like the investigation itself is about whether or not the Russians colluded to get him elected president.
Yep.
But I feel like this could be an interesting way to look at whether or not he actually did collude with the Russians by giving him business deals and a hotel deal. And I think that's really interesting because I think like we've been looking at like two investigations, whether or not he colluded with the Russians or whether or not he has business ties with the Russians while he was, and people are starting to look into his shady business ties as well. And so I think now this finally like connects both of those investigations and ties them together for the first time, really.
Well, and that was sort of the red line too, that Trump was talking about.
Wasn't one of the business deals of this Russian hotel had to do with like a $50 million penthouse pad that he was given to Putin for this hotel? So right there, it just seems, it's fishy, but I'd like to sit there and wait until Mueller comes out before I say there's a smoking gun.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's ever going to be a smoking gun there, but at the same time, you know, again, the question is this the kind of thing that would give him leverage, would alter the way that he perceives Russia, the way that he deals with Russia and some of the things that they've been involved in? Because there's a lot of questions about, frankly, whether or not they soften their position on Russia as a party, as the part of the platform of the convention. There's now some discussion that, you know, Trump was definitely new. He lied and said, I didn't say anything about Russia and changing the platform, but no, now it does look like he directly said, no, we need to soften our stance against Russia as part of our party's platform, and he pushed for that at the convention. He's got people directly contradicting his testimony and some of the answers that he might have given to Mueller's team.
They say that prior to Trump, 6 in 10 Republicans did not have Russia in a positive light. That time has now changed, I think 3 in 10. Mm-hmm. So his influence on the U.S. voting public, and when it comes to Russia, is very influential. And so right there, I feel is fishy, you know, especially when you're dealing with a foreign entity that is attacking sovereign states.
Yeah, with Ukraine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and so that's the question. Is this the kind of thing, can he effectively deal with Russia on a question like this as all this stuff is out there? And as this stuff swirls, he's at the G20 summit right now. Mm-hmm. There's discussions on whether or not he's actually going to talk to Vladimir Putin. Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Russia wants the meeting. Trump's cornered, now says he doesn't want to have it, but it looks like it might happen anyway.
I don't know. He may just be soft. I feel like he has really been softening up his position because he was basically making concessions during the last meeting that he had with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. And I think like a bunch of people in Washington were saying it was like one of the most disgraceful moments in U.S. foreign policy in modern history, really. And like since then, many of those people who have been calling President Trump out on his foreign policy aren't going to be in the next Congress. And so the Congress has gotten, the Republican Party has gotten more Trumpier, and more of the opposition has left. And so I feel like that gives him more wiggle room to push his agenda with the Republican base, because many of his opponents in the Republican Party are gone.
Well, opponents within the Republican Party, but he's got new opponents that are going to be coming into office in January, and the Democrats. And so the question is, if you're the Democrats, how much do you start opening that can of worms again, going back into the investigation that the House Committee on Intelligence didn't really do a real investigation on any of this kind of stuff? Would you reopen it, or is it the kind of thing you leave alone and let Mueller do his job?
As a voting Democrat or a left-leaning person, Trump is our biggest rallier. So it's like, do I want Trump to leave? No. To me, he brought on this wave of females, new ethnicities into Congress. I mean, I think they have to walk a line.
What would you do? Would you want him to go after him?
I do want them to go after him, because I feel like for too long the current House of Representatives and the Senate have basically given him a pass. I think now that the Democrats are in control of the House of Representatives, now he's finally starting to understand that, oh wait, I won't have a pass anymore. I'm actually going to have to not only think about his legislative agenda is effectively dead now, because there's no way his border wall is going to pass the House.
What legislative agenda?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. I haven't seen much of one of those. And I mean, you can govern by presidential fiat for only so long. At some point, you're going to need the cooperation of the legislative branch, and I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Well, infrastructure might be something that...
Yeah.
Well, wait, we had Infrastructure Week, remember? We did that, last year for a whopping total of 2 days? There was no money. It was basically a really weak federal match. They were going to give, $30 billion, and the states had to come up with $300 to get some of that $30 billion, which is nothing.
Well, maybe something larger will happen in it.
Maybe it will. But the other thing that I want to talk about Trump, though, that was really puzzling to me this week, his own administration, his appointees, his teams that were looking into climate science, came out with a very dire climate change report that he is now trying to back away from, saying it's not a big deal. Basically saying that the science of their own administration is not to be trusted at this point in time. And so, as somebody that's actually going to inherit this place and probably have to deal with some of the ramifications of this, Alex, I mean, how are you feeling about where the president's coming down in this and whether or not we're responding?
I'm honestly not that surprised with President Trump. I mean, this is the man who campaigned on clean coal, as he called it. He wants to I feel like his administration is in the pockets of the big oil companies. So it's really not surprising that he's contradicting his own administration's climate policy. I mean, he pulled out of the Paris Agreement. And I feel like this makes the situation more dire, because now that the U.S. is basically ignoring not only the Paris climate deal, but ignoring their own top climate scientists, it makes the situation more dire for me, because if we don't fix the climate change, if we don't start fixing our energy sources now, it's going to affect polar ice caps. It's going to cause mass extinctions. The weather is going to get more extreme, and with those ice caps melting, it's going to cause the east and west coasts to flood, and possibly the entire coastal region of the whole world to flood. And so it's a dire situation that we have to take seriously.
Well, Trump won't react unless it affects his pocketbook.
Yeah.
And so those East Coast, properties that he owns, is once they're affected, once his golf courses on the oceans are affected, that's when he's gonna be like, oh, maybe this. But right now he doesn't see
care.
it. He doesn't care, and he doesn't care what facts are out there. He will create his own narrative of what is actually true. And it's sad to say that there are people that will just go along with whatever he says.
Well, the thing that I think is problematic for me is that, he said, look, we could do all these things, we could make all these changes, but these other countries are contributing, they're not doing anything, so why should we do everything? I guess I'm troubled by sort of this this notion that we don't lead by example
need
anymore
to
as a
lead by
nation.
example.
We need to lead by
we've stopped.
example.
We've given up that mantle.
Yeah.
This America First thing just basically says we're going to do what we want and not worry about anything else. I
It's
see that as
dangerous.
problematic because having that moral sort of high road, high ground, is something that we're not perfect by any stretch,
No,
but we did have a lot over some of these other nations
Yes.
that we're
Yeah.
ceding that
I mean,
position to. I mean, China's going to take that over. at some
Yeah,
point.
I mean, looking at our relationship with many of our closest allies, they've become broken out alliances. I mean, we were closest allies with like Britain and Germany and France and Canada. And now, like,
We're at
he's
odds with them on a
we're
daily basis.
Yeah, and now he's getting closer to Russia. And I just think it's crazy because who would have told me like 3 years ago that like we would be flipping alliances instead of being close with like Canada of all countries. We're buddying up with Saudi Arabia and Russia.
Well,
Authoritarian countries.
This is my favorite tweet about this issue, though, right? About the climate change issue. This is from President Trump, and I just have to put this out there because it was just so Trump. This
Yeah.
is peak Trump. One of the problems that a lot of people like myself, we have very high levels of intelligence, but we're not necessarily such believers. You look at our air and our water, and it's right now at a record clean.
You could tell that's the people of Flint.
Well,
Good
there
one.
you go. And that's the kind of thing. I mean, there were 300 scientists that worked on this report, and they said that it wasn't focused on science and it wasn't focused on data, and they're basically trying to use it. Sarah Huckabee Sanders actually said, well, they don't know what they're talking about. We do.
Right.
Who do you believe?
I believe the scientists,
Yeah.
because they worked in the Obama administration. Many of these EPA officials.
They
I'm
worked
so-
in a lot of different. I mean, they
They-
worked in a lot of
yeah.
different
Just the Obama,
administrations.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like I'm surprised not that many of them haven't resigned yet. I think it shows that they're really trying to be the moral high ground here in this situation, trying to reassure not just the country but the whole world that hey, there are people who still care about protecting the world and who care about ensuring that we can fight against climate change.
Well, let's stick with the president, but this is something that definitely is impacting us here locally in Michigan. The president has been very critical of General Motors' announcement that they're going to lay off a bunch of blue-collar workers, frankly. 3 big plants, Oshawa, Ontario, Lordstown, Ohio, and of course the Poletown assembly plant are going to be shuttered sometime in 2019. Those jobs will be going away. Not sure if there's any indication that they'll mothball them or what they're going to do there. The president obviously angry and lashing out at Mary Barra, the CEO of General Motors, about this. There wasn't a lot of noise about the white-collar job cuts that they announced a few weeks ago. But once it's blue-collar jobs, of course, then the president gets on there suggesting that GM is stupid and doing bad things, and where's the $11 billion, which they paid back already, by the way. But you look at General Motors, and much of the focus on this has been, well, this is GM doing dumb GM things like they did in the past, not paying attention to consumer trends. I don't see it that way. I see General Motors looking ahead to an industry that's about to go through a major, major disruption. It's already starting, and trying to basically build up cash reserves as they figure it out and invest in new technology. Derek, I'll start with you on this one. I mean, we have this romantic attachment to automotive jobs in this city, so we think about it a little bit differently than other places do, but I mean, is this something that we should be expecting across the board from a lot of different companies?
Well, I have complete confidence in Mary Barra. I mean, I feel like she's making the hard decisions. I don't want to lose jobs because it affects our whole region. We are too tied as Michigan tied to the big 3, but I see she's trying to take care of her company. And to me, what she's doing is she's doing a good not a good job as far as labor is concerned, but she's doing a good job to restore or keep the bottom line where it needs to be so they can be helpful in the future.
And I mean, Alex, you're growing up in a generation, you don't have a driver's license.
No.
You're not interested in owning a car. And I'm wondering how widespread sort of that notion is out there amongst people your age, because you said the days of selling 17 million cars in the U.S. in a year probably are going away. I mean, there's going to be car sharing, there's Uber, there's all kinds of different ways to get around. What is it about cars that you're not interested in?
I feel like for most of us, a lot of young people are moving to the big cities. And as you know, the big cities have a lot of congestion with traffic and all sorts of stuff. So it's really not useful to own a car because 1, you'll have to pay for parking, and 2, traffic is so bad that it's basically, why would you take a car to drive to work anyways? Because you'll be in traffic for a couple of hours, especially in places like Los Angeles. So many young people are now relying, again, on Uber, public transportation. For example, like most young people like take the subway in New York. They don't own a car to drive like 15 minutes, like 15 blocks to get to their, office area. They take the subway to get there. And for me, it was convenient to live in Grosse Pointe because, I could walk everywhere and be fine. I understand, like, if you're out in West Bloomfield, that's totally different because they have no sidewalks. You have to drive everywhere. It really just depends on where you're from, because if you live in a big city or you live in an area where it's easily accessible by walking everywhere, then you won't really need a car as much. But if you obviously live in a place that...
I just got the feeling that you didn't really enjoy driving anyway.
I didn't enjoy driving. I feel like...
You did go to driver's ed.
I did go to driver's ed. It's just I feel like I was afraid, like, going on the road because I saw like a bunch of other reckless driving on the road, and it made me kind of like paranoid that I was going to get into a car accident.
I have an employee that he doesn't own a vehicle, and he lives probably 2 miles away, and he walks to work, maybe rides his bike when he can, and he lives a healthier lifestyle. And millennials in general, I think, are a little bit more practical. They don't need the hoopla of owning a vehicle, owning a snazzy
It's
new
not
vehicle.
hoopla, it's just money.
Yeah, it's just, and you see millennials living in their parents' house longer,
Yeah.
He's on campus.
Yeah. We'll see that after you graduate. We'll see what
He's going to be
happens.
somewhere when he gets out of school. I
think-
am feeling New York or San Francisco.
Yeah, well,
in his future.
moving to millennials moving to the urban areas, or in general, retirees moving to urban areas. Like you said, the congestion is a huge
factor.
Parking your car, paying for parking, all these things add up, and the practicality of owning a car just isn't what it used to be.
And also, it's just not just owning a car is expensive because
Yeah.
you have to pay. You have to like have car insurance. You have to pay for the car when you get it. You have to make monthly payments on it, and the world's just getting more expensive. And especially all these students and all these millennials are moving to big cities, which are already really expensive to live in if you want to pay rent.
Right.
Like especially in California, where you have to pay like $1,300 a month to get like a tiny little apartment in the Bay Area. Owning a car is another expenditure on top of having to pay for a mortgage, on top of having to pay for a bunch of other stuff like groceries, insurance.
And so when you look at cars, you're not even like sitting there going, "Oh, that's a great looking car." You really don't care, do you?
I don't care.
Have you ever gone to the North American?
Oh yeah, I've gone. It's fun. It really is.
It's fun to see the car, but to see the price tag is another thing.
I'm just like, ooh. It's like, am I ever going to own this car?
Right.
I'm not. So I could care less if I have this car now. I like looking at them. I don't like talking about them and owning them.
Understood. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break here. This is the People's Panel. I'm Craig Fahle, your host. Glad to have you with me. Derek Peters is with me. Alex Fahle. No resemblance there at all. We'll be right back. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we've got to talk about what's going on in Lansing. As I always say, the stuff that happens in Lansing is the stuff that really impacts us, and they are working on a couple of things in this lame duck session that I think you need to know about. So we'll get into that next.
I'm Jackie Callan, co-host of Accent Your Beauty with Dr. Mark Berkowitz, a champion of cosmetic surgery. And he doesn't have to knock anyone out. He just makes you a knockout. Right, Doc?
That's right, Jackie. Come to me and I'll knock out wrinkles, I'll knock out fat, and I'll knock out aging. And watch us on new radio media, Accent Your Beauty, Wednesdays at 7.
How much you want to bet that 70 episodes turns into 9 seasons? The very last joke on the show is Rick getting his Szechuan sauce.
Hey, Morty, I got the Szechuan sauce!
We're at C2E2 with the legendary Chris Claremont.
Greetings, my fellow geeks. My name is Jordan Trevelyan, and this is Get It to the Geeks. Here we go. We're here with David Yost, the original Blue Power Ranger.
Nobody promised you when you bought the thing on PS4 that you could play it on Switch. I mean,
I'm sorry, but your excuse is garbage.
I'm glad you're back.
This is where the game goes out of control.
And I'm gonna pull out my crossbow and shoot for one of the Sturges on Seraph.
Who? What? All right, sweet chainmail armor. Let's see what you got.
The arrow just kind of whizzes over the Sturge.
Scotty!
Not the other direction. Yeah, no, I'm totally a sharpshooter. Womp.
It's all about you, and that's the way we like it.
Where you're going,
what you do to stay fit,
what you're eating,
what you're thinking,
and how you're feeling. Join the conversation at newradiomedia.com's Lifestyles channel.
Stream the life you want to live.
Welcome back to the People's Panel. I'm Craig Fahle, your host. This is New Radio Media. Glad to have you with me today on this Friday. We're live at the Buell Bar in downtown Detroit. Of course, the People's Panel, again, it's like meet the press, but meet the people instead. No talking heads, no pundits, no politicians. Just regular people talking about the news of the week. Derek Peters is with me, as is Alex Fahle. Thank you both for being here on this Friday. Let's talk about what's going on in Lansing. The lame duck legislative session is happening. First of all, we'll get into whether or not they should even be a lame duck session, given term limits and all that stuff here in Michigan. This is just something I've been thinking about for a long time. But remember, citizens of Michigan signed petitions to put a raise in the minimum wage on the ballot. Rather than have it on the ballot, the legislators took it up with the notion that they wanted to adopt this. So here's what they're talking about. They're going to exempt small businesses, those with fewer than 50 workers, which 50 workers is a pretty big business in my book.
Big business.
They're not going to require paid sick leave for them, which would have been under the thing that would have been on the ballot. And they're also going to slow the increase of the state minimum wage to $12 by 8 years, pushing it to 2030, which is 12 years from now.
Does that
almost,
keep up with
years.
inflation?
Probably not. So the thing is, they didn't want this to be on the ballot because they didn't want to have their hands tied on what this law would be. You guys both would have had an opportunity to vote on this had they left it alone. First of all, would you have voted for an increase in the minimum wage?
Yes.
You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. But what do you think about legislators stalling it in this regard?
I would have voted for it if it was on the ballot. Yes, I feel like with the lame duck session, I think they're starting to realize that, like, oh, wait a second, since they're not going to have a Republican governor anymore, their supermajority in the Michigan Senate's gone. So if they pass anything and the new governor, Gretchen Whitmer, ends up vetoing it, they're not going to have that supermajority to overrun the veto anymore. So they're trying to get as much stuff done now, and they're trying to limit the power of the Secretary of State's office and the Attorney General, and they're just trying.
Well, we'll get into that in just a little bit. That's the second part of this whole discussion.
Yeah, they're just trying to, they realize, especially with minimum wage, this is such a popular issue. Both sides of the aisle, the people typically support hiking the minimum wage, raising the minimum wage. It passed in many states that had ballot initiatives. I think they didn't want it passed because they knew that because it would give them a burden of having to put it on the legislative agenda itself, because they don't want the people to have to vote on it because they don't want a minimum wage raise at all.
Derek, I want to get your thoughts on this one. I mean, look, I understand if you sit there and maybe I was looking at some of the tweaks they were talking about before they actually sat down to work on this, where they're saying, look, maybe tipped workers can't have the same increase because that's going to be a burden on restaurant owners to do that kind of stuff, going from, $4 an hour plus tips to now $12 an hour plus whatever tips you get as a server. I could see them maybe tweaking that a little bit, but to delay that to 2030 for the increase as opposed to 2020?
Yeah, I don't understand why they even think that people would allow that to happen. That's a long rollout, and it really, like we said, I think we said prior, we were going to have a chance to vote on this, and again, the legislation is stepping in before we had a chance to vote it, before we had a chance to bring it to referendum, and kind of going against what the will of the people really wanted.
There is likely going to be a court challenge to this. There is some discussion about whether or not they can adopt and amend a voter initiative in the same year that it was going to be on the ballot. There's some discussion saying that this needs to be paused until the next group of legislators comes in. Of course, the majorities are going to shrink for the Republicans in both houses in Michigan. They very well could come back to it in January, but it would have, the fact that they're doing it this way, and there's not going to be any political payback for this because most of these guys are leaving office. They're either term limited out or they lost their elections. Should they be allowed to have a say on something like this?
No.
Is a lame duck election session election year something that needs to be revamped or revisited?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like their legislative power should probably be taken away the moment that they lose the election. It's only, 2 months?
2 months.
You know, and just trying to push something through just because, you know, you're losing your job, I feel like is not the will of the voters at that time. You know, maybe it was 2 years ago, 4 years ago, whenever they were voted in, but not at this time. That it has changed, and so should the legislative power shift change as well.
I mean, with the new party coming in too, it's like they want to be able to pass all their policy agendas in this lame duck session. And it's unfair because the voters clearly didn't want this.
Speaking of what voters didn't want, they elected, of course, Gretchen Whitmer, Dana Nessel, and Jocelyn Benson to the 3 highest positions in the state. One of the other moves that the Republicans are making in Lansing in this lame duck session is to sort of dilute the power that these 3 would have when they come into office. So what they're trying to do now is create this new commission. It's sort of this Fair Government Oversight Commission, or Fair Political Practices Commission, they're calling it. The Republicans are pushing for this now. Of course, they didn't push for it when they were in control of all of those branches of government. But basically, it would let the legislature have a say over what the Attorney General decides to fight in court, what she doesn't decide to fight in court, over the elections process that the Secretary of State now currently oversees, and frankly would also get into the governor's business a little bit as well on certain things. It would basically insert the legislature in a new way that they have not done before. It seems to me, and this is what a lot of people are calling it, is basically like a, sore loser bill. They cannot give up control. They are unwilling to cede the same control that they enjoyed back to the opposition party. What should be done about this?
Don't they have to appropriate funds for something like that? I mean, what are they going to do? How are you going to? I mean, I just feel like it's them just grasping for power. That being said, is that when Democrats eventually do have power, and I hope that that day does come, I'm tired of living in a red state, and the tide is changing, that, they have to not, act or legislate just like the Republicans do, and should take a lesson from how they are doing it, and not to be so power hungry.
It does seem power hungry. I mean, you were pointing out this morning, this is something that was tried in North Carolina.
Yeah, when they elected the Democratic governor in 2016, they tried to take away the governor's power over appointing Supreme Court justices to the North Carolina Supreme Court. And it was a way to try to limit the power of the new Democratic governor that got elected. And I feel like this is another partisan power grab that the Michigan legislature is trying to do. And obviously, they know Rick Snyder's only going to be in office for another month. And so they're trying to take advantage of that while they can until the new governor is sworn in, until the Secretary of State is sworn in.
Any faith that the governor would actually think about vetoing this kind of stuff?
If they can lobby him, yes. I know he's definitely more of a moderate in comparison to many of these legislatures who are going to be going out of office as well. He's not as conservative, but at the same time, I don't know. I honestly don't know, because he's working really closely with Whitmer over transitioning power. But we're just going to have to see whether or not he vetoes this bill.
I voted for the governor in his first term, and I voted thinking that he would not touch right to work. I completely thought that. I thought he was a moderate. I thought he would govern between both aisles. I was completely wrong, and it's one of those I'll never vote for a Republican again type because of I thought it was a sacred cow that he wouldn't touch. Do I put it past him that he's not going to veto this? I don't really know what he'll do. I hope he won't. I think he won't. I think he would veto something like this, but I could be wrong again. I was wrong in the past.
Well, we've only got a couple of minutes left. I want to ask you one last question. There isn't actually a bill in Lansing right now. I don't know if it's going to get a hearing or if it's going to pass, but Republicans are trying to push a bill, at least a couple of them, that would end Michigan's bottle deposit law, suggesting that it would actually boost participation in residential recycling programs around the state by not having the deposit on pop cans and things like that. I mean, we don't have deposit on water bottles, which they should if they're going to do that. But just out of curiosity, wondering what everybody thinks about getting rid of Michigan's 10-cent deposit law. I mean, you don't drink pop.
I don't drink pop.
So you never really pay it.
No, I don't. But at the same time, it helps. Is it like a tax almost?
Well, it's just 10 cents per can, and then you return the cans, get your dime back, and it's a way to keep people from littering, because it used to be before the bottle deposit law, Derek. You remember, I mean, there's garbage everywhere.
I think that the whole littering thing, I'm not saying it's gone, but I definitely think it's managed a lot better with the deposit law and with recycling. Do I think we can do away with the deposit law? I'm not quite sure, but I know that people recycle more. I myself take my deposit cans and put them into the recycling bin and don't even take it back anymore.
Yeah.
We do have neighborhood people that come around and go through our recycling. Hey, all power to them to take the cans if that's what they want to do. It gives them something. But for me, I'm not a fan of the deposit.
No, it's been in place for so long. It's just something that you do.
I know my grandma, sometimes when I stay over at her house, we always go to the grocery store and we like take all the cans and the bottles out.
That's what a nice grandson you are.
But like, it definitely, I think, helps encourage people not to litter, and I don't want like a bunch of more trash on the streets.
Okay, 30 seconds. The Supreme Court may take up this case. Should people be able to walk along the beach, or should private property owners own the property from the water line all the way to their house and be able to block people?
It's never been a problem for us because we always go to public beaches, and so we always walk on public beaches.
But I think they should be allowed to walk. I mean, people walk along oceans, people walk on sidewalks. I feel like this should be a public access.
All right, well, we're going to have to wrap it up right there. That's the People's Panel for this week. Derek Peters, thank you. Alex Fahle, thank you very much. I'm Craig Fahle, and we'll be back next week. Thanks for tuning in.
I'm Jackie Callan, co-host of Accent Your Beauty with Dr. Mark Berkowitz, a champion of cosmetic surgery. And he doesn't have to knock anyone out. He just makes you a knockout. Right, Doc?
That's right, Jackie. Come to me and I'll knock out wrinkles, I'll knock out fat, and I'll knock out aging. And watch us on new radio media, Accent Your Beauty, Wednesdays at 7.